Hi, Rich from Richcraft Performance. Today we're going to talk about what I consider to be the Nickelback of carburetors. Everybody seems to hate them, but nobody really knows why. We're going to go through some of the features of the old Carter AFB style carburetor, from an old one from 1964 right up to one that was bought last month. Okay, so this carburetor came out in 1957. It has been pretty much the same. It was pretty much the same right up into the mid 70s when it was discontinued, replaced with the Carter Thermoquad. They've been on 1 million stock vehicles. Edelbrock sells thousands of these a year in their modern Performer series. That's going to be the basis of this video. There are different ones with air valve secondaries. Not really going to be covering those today, but I just want to talk about a few things that I've found over the years on this particular style of carburetor. So, one of the first problems that I know of on these carburetors is the expectations of them. Everybody expects to pull this carburetor out of the box, put it on their car, and have their car go faster. Sometimes that's the case, sometimes it's not. When Carter made these for the OE, pretty much on Dodge and GM vehicles, they ended up making 505 different versions of this carburetor to fit those basic engine needs, right? So now we expect the 10 models that Edelbrock sells to fit every hot rod, muscle car, truck, whatever the guy's dreamed up in his backyard, to put it on and for it to work. And for the most part, these are pretty good right out of the box carburetor. They do have some shortcomings. So I'm going to cover some of those today, right? So this is your basic 1407 Edelbrock. It was a factory manual choke, 750 CFM, great little carburetor. I love these on 350 Chevys, right? So, first of all, I think that Edelbrock carburetors, Carter carburetors, I think they're a little optimistic on their CFM ratings, okay? So, when you do the old math, and there's a formula is everywhere out there where you take your cubic inches times the RPM that you wish to go to, divide it by 3, 4, 5, 6, and that spits out a number. When you do that to a small block Chevy, it tells you that like a small block Chevy 350, it tells you you want about 600 CFM. And I can tell you for a fact, if you put a 600 CFM carburetor on a 350, you're missing out, right? Especially on these. When you go through and look at the specs on these carburetors, the 750 is the first jump in throttle bore size and in venturi diameter on all of them. The 500s and 600s are exactly the same throttle bore size and venturi size. So the 750 and the 800, they both get bigger. So we'll start there. So this is not a tuning video. There's tons of that information out there everywhere. Edelbrock's got a lot on their website. There's a ton of information on forums about different tricks guys have done. What I'm basically doing is covering the hardware today. So first, I'm just going to give you a quick glance over the carburetor, point out a few things, common asked questions that I've seen on the internet and such. Okay, so first, this is your timed vacuum port. So that means there's no vacuum at closed throttle. When you slightly crack the throttle, the vacuum signal goes to there. This one over here is a constant vacuum source. Okay, and guys are always wondering what one to primarily hook up to a distributor. This one. The timed one is for a vacuum advance in your typical application. Now, there are tricks you can do if you're getting into really wild camshafts and stuff like that. Sometimes they like a little more initial timing, and if your distributor doesn't have in it, a good trick to try is try that one. Okay? Because vacuum advance always goes away when you go wide open throttle anyway, so it's no longer a factor. So it's something to try. If you're really having a hard time getting the thing to idle, try the straight one. Okay, so these things are basic. I love these carburetors for their durability. You can't kill these things with a stick. I'm going to pull the top off this one now and show a few things. So the top just lifts off like that. It comes off in a few minutes, a few T25 torque screws. That is the only gasket in this carburetor, other than a couple underneath a few different pieces. But it is the only gasket that is exposed to like your float bowls. So there's never a leak, Like a Holley, they're known for gaskets drying out, the little O-rings on the washers drying out. You fire your car up in the spring and the thing's got fuel leaks. These don't do that. I love that about these. So this is the step-up piston. It fits in this little hole up top. If you didn't already know, you don't have to take the screw all the way out. You can just swing it to the side and it slides down in here like so. A little harder to do when it's not on the carburetor. What that does is that's a little vacuum chamber and it goes down, and this little step rod basically plugs off the jet. And when you're in a low vacuum situation, it's got a spring underneath it that pulls it up. And I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but this thing is tapered. So when it goes down, it's bigger, so it plugs more of the jet. So it basically effectively reduces the jet size. When you step on it, the little spring that fits up in here will pull it out and it gets skinnier, effectively increasing the jet size. That's your transition for when you're cruising along, got lots of vacuum, you're cruising along, just putting along at 35 or 40 miles an hour. This thing is pulled down, getting you the best available economy. You come up to a bit of a hill, the vacuum drops, and this little spring pushes it up. Now, there's a lot of confusion out there about how to pick this little spring. Even the manuals that they have for these are quite vague. And I'll just tell you right now, you take a vacuum gauge, borrow a vacuum gauge from a buddy, go buy one, they're pretty cheap. Idle your car, if it's an automatic, you idle it in gear, you take your vacuum read, you divide it in half. And these things are rated 3, 5, 7. So if you got 14 inches of vacuum, you put a 7 spring in. That's where you start. If you find that the car seems like it's wanting a little bit, hunting a little bit, maybe it might even cough when you come up just a slight incline, increase the spring, okay? Go to the next side up. If it gets worse, try the other way. The primary side of these things is pretty basic and they're good right out of the box. And now when I say good right out of the box, what a lot of people don't realize when they're buying one of these is if it comes with an electric choke from Edelbrock, they are tuned for economy. Unless it's a 500, they only make one version of that, whether it's electric choke or not. But they're tuned slightly leaner to try to meet economy demands, right? When you buy a manual choke one, and don't ask me why they did this, they are tuned for performance. So if you get yourself one with an electric choke, it's no big deal. You buy their little recalibration kit, costs you $25 or $30, comes with a little pamphlet, you put the right size jets in it, you're back up to where the starting point of the manual choke is. And then you have all the parts to take it further. Next, I'm going to talk about what I consider to be the Achilles heel of this carburetor. This is what causes the most hate out of any other feature of this carburetor, and that is the secondary side, okay? This is a mechanical secondary carburetor, much like a Holley double pumper, okay? What it lacks is that second pump. So when you step on the throttle and the secondary is open, once you get it past about 65% of your throttle linkage, the secondary is open. The main metering system here hasn't had a chance to catch up and give the engine extra fuel. So, like we all know, you need to somehow induce it, okay? You got to give it a little boost. So Holley does it with an accelerator pump. A Rochester Quadrajet does it with that spring-loaded air door. These do it with this little flap. And it's simple little flap that is weighted. You see, there's no spring tension. It's just the weight of it keeping it closed. Well, when Carter was making these back in the 60s, they had many, many different versions of this little air door. Okay, they come out pretty simple. You pull out the rear venturias, just 2 screws hold them in each. I took them out ahead of time to save some time on camera. And there it is. It is that simple. It is just this little, you can see the counterweight. Now, this one, when they decided which one to put into this carburetor, they decided on this fairly lightweight, fairly aggressive little one, because they had to pick something. They weren't going to have many different options. Now, I don't know if you saw it on the table earlier, but I have a Carter from 1964. This is a factory Carter AFB from a 64 Cadillac with a 429 in it. Okay, it's even so old that it's got the smaller diameter air cleaner base. They hadn't quite figured out that they wanted to make 5 1/8 their thing. So we're going to pull this one, which I also loosened earlier. Same thing, see how similar they are inside? They haven't changed. Pull those to the side. I'm going to pull this little guy out. Okay, and we see, get this out again, that they literally haven't changed. The parts still go in and do the same thing, which I don't know if you notice on camera. Okay, the difference, if I can put them in the same direction, see how much extra weight is here? It's because the Cadillac was a lot slower revving, comfort engine. It was built to make some horsepower, of course, but the biggest thing is they didn't want any hesitations. They didn't want any rough riding. Guys that were buying Cadillacs wanted smooth. Okay, so when they figured out this one, is they realized that this one needed a little heavier weight. They didn't want that 4-ball to come on so quick and angry. They wanted it to come on smooth and soft. Well, this gives us a little lesson. So what this is a higher revving, more aggressive engine wants a lighter one of these. And a slower revving engine wants a heavier one of these. Okay? To give it time to get enough fuel in there to wake up that big beast. Right? So, when I'm messing with these and they got a bit of a bog, I buy these carburetors, these old ones, because they're not worth much. You can get them at swap meet, $10, $15. They have the heavier weight doors. And we actually try them because they fit exactly the same, right? Now there's guys online tell you to drill holes, fill them with lead, and you can do that. Only thing I will tell you is there's not a lot of room in here. By the time you put this in here, there is not a whole heck of a lot of room. So you got to be really careful about if you're strapping anything to the side. I've tried wheel weights, like tire balancing stick-on weights, and you trim them down and you stick them right on the edge, and that quite often helps, right? And the tire weight's designed with a pretty good glue so it doesn't just fall off right away. But you do got to be careful, okay? But don't be shy if you have any of these laying around to try a different one. If it looks heavier and you're having a bit of a bog, give it a shot. Now Carter back in the 60s, they came out with the one with the spring-loaded air door. Now just by simply turning a screw, you can increase your spring tension. Okay, and that is basically how this thing works. And a lot of guys, they'll call it a velocity door, they'll call it a secondary air door. I'll tell you what it really is. It's a momentary choke. So when you open the throttle butterflies down below, this thing basically works like a choke. And this right here, that's your main metering for the secondaries. That little guy is a little fuel squirter. And when this thing is, for the most part, closed, and the throttle butterflies are open below, see how it's below, once it all goes back together, that'll actually be below the lip of that butterfly. It'll pull a straight shot of fuel out there, the same as an accelerator pump. So most of the tuning problems with these things is guys fight that bog, because they'll figure out how to do it off a hard acceleration from a stoplight. They get it all good, they're cruising around, they hit the throttle a little softer next time, and it finds a new bog. They can drive you nuts. But if you can live with that, this is an amazing carburetor that will give you tons of worry-free miles. Okay, so let's move on to something else. If you've ever worked on one of these, you got two floats here. And they simply tell you in the manual to check the amount of drop. They want about 1 inch to 1.25 inches of drop. That's pretty easy to adjust. There's a little tab back here. You just bend that little guy to get your appropriate amount of drop. And the float level is simply set. They tell you to take a 7/16 drill bit and insert it right here. And just on top of the gasket, and this gap in here should be 7/16. Well, I can tell you from working on these for years that when Carter built them for OEM, this was never 7/16. This float level ranged from 1/8 of an inch to 1/2 inch, I think the lowest one I ever found. So we had a circle track car, and everybody says you can't make these work for a circle track car, and I'm proof that you can. We had a circle track car that was having a bit of a lean issue because as the fuel was sloshing to the one side of the carburetor, it must have been pulling a little air out of the secondary jet back here. So after some track time, some listening to it, and some talking to my son who was driving, I figured out that it was running out of fuel, but just barely. So we came up. So I went to 3/8. He said it got better. Went to 5/16. Finally, that car's running at 1/4 inch, and it has never been stronger. We've never had a fuel like boil over or run over or hard start. It's been priceless. So that 7/16 is a great rule out of the box. But if you're having issues where if you're dragging the car and it seems to be having a bit of a trouble, or every time you throw the car into a corner, it seems to come out a little flat, try bringing this up. It's a pretty quick job. You know, it's just 10 screws in the top. Hardest thing about them is on these little linkages, they got these little spring clips. Those things can be projectiles and leave town pretty quick. I've lost my own fair share of those things over the years. Actually taking this carburetor apart earlier, one bounced off the ceiling and actually landed back on my workbench. I was pretty happy about that, but I've lost a ton of those. Okay, that kind of covers the inside. Now, I'm gonna pull another one up here. Here's something that I absolutely hate about this carburetor. Where they put the fuel in it. So, a lot of cars, this wouldn't matter. You can have a nice tall air cleaner, you can have a chunk of fuel hose coming straight out of them. Now, I don't have one on the bench with me today, but if you're running a drop base air cleaner because you got a G-body GM or something like that with low hood clearance, that line rubs right on that air cleaner. It has always driven me up the wall. Now, Edelbrock makes, and it's not a lot of money, I think they're $15. They make this nice chrome little tube that comes out here and goes down across the bottom. Okay, bringing the fuel out to a more natural place like other carburetors. It's a wise little investment. Actually, I do have one in my, somebody's bringing me one. Here it is. So there it is. So you see how that would just, you unscrew that little guy, screw that one in there, comes with a barb fitting. You can actually get them where they come with a reusable fuel filter that looks pretty cool. It's all blue anodized and red. Okay, so try one of these. You'll avoid that fuel line rubbing through possibly if you're putting a lot of miles on the car, and they just look better. So to sum it up, these are a great little carburetor. New, used, I buy every one I can get my hands on. I think we got 5 or 6 of them kicking around in different compartments around the house right now. We get them at swap meets. I bought them as cheap as $20. That's pretty rare. That ugly one I showed earlier, that was a $20 one, but it's particularly ugly. They're an easy carburetor to kit. They're easy to work with. If you can manage to work some of that bog out, if it exists, I've had them where they just plop them on and they just go. If you can work with that, if you're thinking about buying a new one, consider buying the one with a spring-loaded air door. Because with that spring-loaded, instead of having to change the weight of that the air door down in there, it is now just a simple spring tension. If you're thinking about buying one brand new, I would consider buying one of those. But if you got one of these, you don't have to throw it away. You don't have to listen to the guys on the forums that say put a Holley on it. Holley's a great carburetor. It's been proven they make a little bit more horsepower to this than these. I think that's due to these are a little smaller CFM than they claim to be. I think that's where that comes from. But for a good regular use carburetor that will go every time you ask it to, these are great. Actually, years ago, I swapped half a dozen fire trucks over for one fire haul because they all had Hollies on them and on big 429 Fords. And every time they had a fire, things wouldn't start. So I went up with a half a dozen of these with a friend of mine, and we swapped every one of them over, and those things are running the same carburetors 15 years later. That's how good these are. So give them a shot. You won't regret it. They're just loyal. Okay. And for people that think I'm a Holly hater, I've got tons of these too. Okay. This is a fairly new one. This is an aluminum one. Pretty cool piece, $750. This is actually off my son's truck. That's why it's dirty, because he doesn't clean his stuff. So, if you like what you saw, if you want to learn more, throw something in the comments if I missed something or you wanted to hear about something else. But if you like what you saw, like the video and share us with your friends. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.